I will shift our conversation now to the topic of the day as we're looking at the revenue allocation formula between the tiers of government as well in Nigeria, which has remained a source of constant debate on its adequacy in ensuring fairness in distribution. Earlier this year, the chairman of the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission, Dr. Elias Mbam, announced that a review of the allocation formula will happen before the end of this year, and truly this has commenced. Now, with public hearings going on across the different geopolitical zones of the country, it will interest you to know that the current revenue allocation formula, which specifies that 52.7%, 26.7% and 20.6% of the revenue to be shared to the federal, state and local government has been in existence since the year 1992 and was designed during the tenure of former President Olusegun Obasanjo. However, in a bid to ensure equitable distribution of the accrued revenue, the RMAFC has proposed a revised revenue sharing arrangement where the federal government earns about 40%, the state government earns 35%, and local government areas 25%, with the assurance that the development would help meet the yearnings and developmental aspirations of Nigerians. Well, to deliberate on this and much more, I have in our Abuja studio, I beg your pardon, the senior economist at SPM Professionals, Paul Alaje. Good to have you on the show this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon.
Now, Paul, the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission says it will unveil a new revenue allocation formula by the end of this year for state, federal, local governments. Now, how do you see this tilting the narrative of development both at federal and subnational levels?
First, I think allocating more revenue to the subnational is so very important, particularly to state government. When you look at the Nigerian burden today and you consider what state is expected to do in terms of insecurity or security, in terms of guaranteeing food supply through private sector and farmers, you'd agree with me that definitely we need to allocate more to subnationals so that they can perform and they can improve in terms of what they are expected to do today. What they are currently getting is so small compared to what is expected of them. If we're also talking about fiscal federalism, we must also match our expectation with our actions by allocating more to the subnationals, while federal government continue to concentrate on things that affect the interrelationship among states and also for Nigeria as a whole. So, but there are some concerns that should be taken away from federal government completely, and these should be within the purview of state government and in some cases local government. This will give strength to our democracy. It will also build confidence of the people among the subnational, which is so very important.
And now, the last time we had the revenue sharing formula was way back, reviewed in 1992, and the federal government, it currently takes about 52.6%, and looking at states also earning about 36%, and the federal capital territory take 26.72%, while local government also take 20.6%. How often would you say we need to see a review like this nature?
The last time we had, like you said, was 1992. Another one is coming in 2001. A child of 1992 to date is almost 30 years old. So I think this period is too long because of the reality of our economy and how things are emerging from time to time. 10 years period for me will be a good time to review, and a review does not mean there must be a change, even if it's 10 years. But we need to consider that the economic reality we have today and the sharing formula we are having as at that same time, do they correspond, do they match? If there is a mismatch, then it will be very important for us to organize a review, the kind of review that we are having now after town hall meetings, which is very important.
And then looking at the sort of review, you also want to see there are different proposals in terms of having a people-centric formula, equitable and fairer allocation formula. Some say that they're looking at a state where we see the federal government earn about 40, which is share in that. States also get about 35 and local governments 35. In terms of consensus and the proposal here, what do you think would be the likely pattern going forward?
Well, I think federal government will still take the lead. It might still have about 40% from the 52% I currently have. I think 40% will be good for federal government, and the remaining 60% should be shared among the remaining 2 tiers of government. Of course, states carry a lot of responsibility, but the level of government that we are not paying so much attention to is the local government. For me, most of our economic challenges could be solved at the local level by local government chairmen, I beg your pardon, where we should put a lot of focus on them. When you talk about agriculture and quite a number of other things, we need to empower local government and also hold them responsible. But for this review, I'm expecting state government to have more revenue than local government because of the realities of today. But in the coming period, we need to empower local government because it's the closest to the people, and the people expect more dividend from local government than they're expecting from both federal and the state government together.
And some analysts argue that the pace of development we've seen at subnational levels is one of the problems we have at hand, just because of the element of waiting for allocation versus developing very strong regional agenda or growth agenda, development agenda at state level and then regional level. Do you see any sense in this theory where we don't necessarily need to wait for these allocations and rather develop blueprints, strategic plans, intentions, governors coming together to ensure that there is a robust agenda for development without waiting for allocations?
Well, if there must be consumption, there must be production. Most states are not generating revenue sufficient enough for them to become independent. Because of poor revenue from states, they have to wait for federal government or the federation account to be shared in order for them to keep being a state. And that is a huge challenge. Until we have state government as economic centers, or a state in Nigeria, I'm talking about subnational, as economic center, and not just as a state. I give you an example. One of the states in southwest Nigeria has budget being presented of less than 160 billion naira. That is equivalent of a department in Lagos State. Now, such states also want to compete with Lagos State, and you ask, how exactly will this be? This state is not generating revenue, is paying so much in debt, then how will it be able to compete with a state such as Rivers or Lagos or Kano? So it's a huge challenge. What I think we should do is to take states, to make states become independent to a large extent of federal government, so that even if they cannot finance the entire budget, but the recurrent component of their budget must be financed by themselves. And this is why, beyond sharing of revenue, we need to talk about revenue mobilization and revenue generation before revenue allocation. It's a fiscal concern. Fiscal concern is not just about sharing money. We need to bake a bigger cake, because the one we have is getting leaner, is getting very tiny, and I'm afraid it may not be enough in the coming period. When you look at all the state of the federation, from the record we have, over 90% of those that have presented budget are already presenting budget deficits, which means they will be borrowing. The federal government has presented about 16 trillion naira budget. Only 10 trillion naira will come from revenue. So there's huge concern about getting revenue, and it's not rocket science for states and for federal as well as local government to generate more revenue, which is our biggest concern today.
And Paul, just looking at some of the conversations around state becoming much more independent entities when it comes to financial support. Now, the reality remains that every state has a comparative advantage. Why does this still remain a blind spot for most authorities or governments at a subnational level?
Well, it is a huge concern, or it's become very difficult because there is always a federal government to collect money from. And people also are not rightly informed. If you know that if you don't work, you will not eat, you will think twice before you contest in an elections. So people who are contesting election, they are doing so because they know that there is crude oil, or what we call petroleum profit tax, that account for over 70 or 80% of FX to Nigeria and over 50% of government revenue. And they know that this revenue will be shared. Monies that is collected from VAT, whether it is from that state or not, is also going to be shared. So people feel that even though we don't generate as much, even if we don't generate up to 50% of our recurrent expenditure, we are certain that monies will be shared to us. But when the narrative change, which I hope will change, of course, this is going to come in, into force, what Revenue Mobilization and Allocation and Fiscal Commission is saying. I wish we had patterned this change in another direction. It will be based on state performance. And this will be based on percentage improvement for more revenue to be allocated to states. And I hope that federal government and Ministry of Finance that will be supporting states when they want to borrow money should ensure that states that is not performing in its revenue drive don't have access to more loans. The question is, how are they going to pay back? There are a lot of revenue across states. Do you want to talk about agriculture? Quite a number of states have access to arable lands that they can partner with federal government or partner with central bank through different programs central bank is running today, which of course can help reduce unemployment at the state level, improve availability of food, and also reduce food inflation. Whatever happened to a state, we have a way of rubbing off on the entire federation. But this is not what we have seen. What we've seen most of the time is that those who are running states are very, very good with politics, but they are very, very poor with economy, even though this does not apply to all the states. But some of the states, as we continue to see numbers coming from National Bureau of Statistics, as poverty gets entrenched in the states, hunger and deprivation at the state level, and we see high inflation at the state level, at the same time with high unemployment. The question is, who exactly is leading the state? It is easy for us to quickly point to the center. What we don't understand is that the Nigerian country, Nigeria as a country, is divided into 36 plus the FCT, if you like, call it 37. And all of these states must provide what the people need in terms of environment and so on and so forth. And that is why Constitution needs to be reviewed so that responsibility can match with the revenue that we are giving to state. Then we will know who to hold accountable. When there is high unemployment, everybody runs to the center. The question is what is happening to subnational that are always coming to pick monies, and whether these monies are spent rightly or wrongly, it's a different conversation entirely.
Paul, we are gradually wrapping up our conversation now, and I like the thought which you left just now, responsibility matching up with the revenue provided. Now, irrespective of the infrastructure shortfall we have, which also limits the capacities of state to generate as much, irrespective of the level of comparative advantages, talk of agriculture, mineral deposit, and a whole lot more, but within the area of research and value addition, to what extent do you see us now presenting much more a formidable force in terms of value addition, synergy between investment, promotion, and an export agenda at the state level going forward? The year 2021 is gradually wrapped up to an end, wrapping up to an end. We see forecasts for the year 2022 coming on board. To what extent do you now see these bodies in charge of investment, promotion, and export also taking shape and taking the agenda much more seriously, and government setting a pace within these lines?
Well, I think state authority and fiscal authority in different states, we need to roll their sleeves. They need to become more innovative. Everybody belongs to a state. We all do not belong to Lagos State or the FCT or River State. These are star locations. and if you compare their revenue to their performance, is relatively better off compared to the rest of the federation. But if I were to speak directly to the state, why don't you woo people who are remitting, withholding taxes and so on and so forth to these 3 regions so that some of the revenues will come to your state? That on one hand. States also need to analyze what revenue, what their asset looks like. Do they have state corporation? Do they have fiscal asset for the state? To what extent is the skill of human resources within the state? Because you cannot generate revenue beyond the potential of your asset. Most states don't even have assets diary. They don't even know what they have in terms of assets. We run states just administratively and not applying economics to the running of states so that we can have more revenue. So if you want to improve in terms of revenue generation, particularly for states, there are things that states and federal need to do for revenue to boost, which will include provide relative security, also provide at least basic environment for business to thrive. The rest will now lie with chief executive at the state level and also fiscal authority at the state level, so that we can have more and more people come to invest. If there are poor exchange rates and the one we cannot predict as we're experiencing right now, I'm afraid we will not attract as much as what we expect to have in revenue. But for us to do this, state and federal, perhaps at the Economic Council, we need to decide what do we want to do? Do we want to attract investment first before we put infrastructure in place? Or we put infrastructure in place, then you attract investment. If you say you attract investment, well, you might not attract as much as you want without infrastructure. And if you say you want to put infrastructure in place, then you need to bother about getting more revenue for this infrastructure to be in place. These are concerns that state government we have, and I hope they'll be able to solve. When you look at what Lagos state government have started doing, is to partner with federal government rail line, which we call the rail line, and they also have the blue line, which perhaps is going to come from somewhere close to Badagry, are coming into Lagos state. The revenue this will give the state in the coming period will position Lagos state even much better than the state is, reduce traffic and so on and so forth. The last time I checked, Lagos is not the only state with huge population. And we have train tracks in other locations of the country. So can we become more innovative as Lagos state start to demonstrate this in their revenue drive and in their expenditure? World Bank is willing to throw weight behind Lagos state. Central Bank is willing to throw their weight behind Lagos state because they are seeing a direction which the state is going. More states we need to show direction. The question is, of over 20 million population in Lagos, what can Osun State, few kilometers away from Lagos, who is battling with revenue concerns and also debt service, what can the state provide for Lagos if truly they are sister state? But if Osun is still operating within the small sphere, I'm afraid it may continue to struggle with revenue and continue to struggle with debt service and issues of paying salaries. The same applies to Ekiti. The same applies to Ondo. What can Ondo provide, even though Ondo seems to be relatively balanced more than the state of Osun as they call it? So for me, I think we need to have people that are more purposeful, people that have more direction and they are more open-minded to run state with their fiscal authority so that we can position our state and revenue in a better position for the books.
And just before I let you go now, Paul, let's look at nipping in the bud the menace of corruption now. To what extent do you also see us developing transparency and implementation index when it comes to all of these allocation?
Sorry, if you can help me repeat that.
Yes, I'm saying that within the context of allocations, we also have to look at the issue of corruption, mismanagement of funds, misappropriation, and other issues such as these. To what extent do you see us also developing a much more robust framework for transparency and implementation index? We need to test over time and data presentation to see that these revenue or funds provided for are properly utilized.
Well, you mentioned the solution to corruption is transparency. Now, we have anti-graft agencies, but to stop corruption, anti-graft agencies should not be the first line that we put forward. It has to be transparency. And one of the things that can help us with transparency will be to adopt a digital system, a digital economy, one in which all records of government must be available for those that need it. All contracts must also be available for those who are competing or competitors of some sort, if you like. But what we have seen most of the time is that we need to write under Freedom of Information Act in order to have information of how government is running its operation. This will not help us to achieve transparency. If 10 people are bidding for the same contract, it should be available online so we know exactly what we are bidding for. And cost of materials should also be made available online. This, to a large extent, will reduce the level of corruption that we have. In a dark room, you may see cockroaches. But when you open it up and there is light everywhere, cockroaches, in this case corruption, will disappear. We cannot continue to keep darkness and hope that we are going to chase corruption from our country. It is unfortunate because we will not see this. Most government revenue fiscal arm should transform their processes to physical paper, to online process that people can access at any time. That's when we know if the construction company in Lagos is also the one in Abuja, is also the one in Sokoto, is also so that we can ask question, what is happening to local contractors? Why have they been excluded in contract on road, on works, and so on and so forth, including housing going on in Nigeria? So my solution, or the advice I've given to those in government, has been for you to reduce corruption, improve your level of transparency. And with transparency, it is difficult for corruption to thrive. If not, as you make the money from one hand, remember that it's not enough, or as you borrow from one hand, you see that most of the money are going through the other hand, and unfortunately, it is corruption. You are not going to see the impact. Poverty level may increase, inflation may increase, high unemployment, and so on and so forth. And we ask that with all of this money that governments have collected at the state, local, and federal level, why is it that we are not feeling the impact as such in the lives of our people? Well, government has done its best, but corruption still seems to be available in our midst. That is why we are not feeling so much impact of government. But transparency will help us to reduce that significantly.
Thank you very much for your thoughts there. Paul Elijah, it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much for having me.